The first snow of December came quietly, like it didn't want to bother anyone. It settled on the cracked sidewalks, the rusted mailboxes, and the narrow porches of Maple Street, as if it had always belonged there. Most people were already asleep when it started, wrapped in warm blankets and half-finished dreams, unaware that winter had officially arrived. Evelyn Carter was awake. She sat at the small kitchen table of her two-bedroom house, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that no longer held any warmth. The clock above the refrigerator ticked louder than it should have, each second stretching into the next, marking time she no longer knew how to fill. Outside, the streetlight flickered, casting a pale yellow glow through the thin curtains. The house felt too quiet, quiet in a way that pressed against her chest and refused to let go. It had been 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days since Daniel died. Evelyn didn't count on purpose anymore. The numbers simply appeared in her mind, uninvited, as natural as breathing. She could remember the exact moment the police officer stood on this very porch, his hat held low, his eyes avoiding hers. She could remember how the world seemed to tilt, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning. Tonight, like many nights before, she wondered how a life could end so suddenly while everything else continued without pause. The kettle on the stove let out a sharp whistle. Evelyn flinched, then stood up slowly, as though even quick movements required permission. She turned off the burner and poured the water into the mug, watching the steam rise and disappear. Daniel used to tease her about how slowly she moved. "You walk like the world is going to fall apart if you rush," he would say with a smile. She smiled now, faintly, at the memory. It faded almost as quickly as it came. Christmas was 3 weeks away. The thought sat heavily in her mind, unwelcome but impossible to ignore. The decorations were still in boxes in the hall closet, untouched since the year Daniel died. The tree stand leaned against the wall, collecting dust. The ornaments, some handmade, some inherited, were wrapped carefully in old newspaper, as if they were fragile pieces of a life she no longer lived. Last year, she hadn't decorated at all, neither had the year before that. People stopped asking after a while. At the hospital where Evelyn worked as a night shift nurse, December came with forced cheer. Hallways glowed with string lights taped along bulletin boards. Someone always played soft Christmas music at the nurses' station, the same songs repeating until they lost whatever magic they once held. Evelyn worked extra shifts that month, not because she needed the money, though she did, but because the hospital felt less empty than her house. There were beeping monitors, quiet conversations, lives still unfolding in small, fragile ways. At least there, silence had purpose. She rinsed her mug and placed it upside down in the drying rack. Midnight crept closer. Another night without sleep, another morning she would greet with tired eyes and practiced calm. A sudden knock at the door cut through the stillness. Evelyn froze. No one ever knocked this late. Her first thought was that something had happened, an emergency, bad news, the kind that arrived unannounced and never left quietly. Her heart began to pound, each beat loud enough to drown out her thoughts. The knock came again, softer this time. She walked toward the door, her steps hesitant. Through the peephole, she saw a figure standing on the porch, bundled in a worn winter coat that looked too thin for the weather. Snow clung to the shoulders and hood. Evelyn opened the door just a few inches. A boy stood there. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. His face was pale from the cold, his dark hair damp with melting snow. He held a small backpack close to his chest, gripping the straps as if letting go might make him disappear. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice trembling. I I don't mean to bother you. I was told someone here might help." Evelyn stared at him, confusion replacing fear. "Who told you that?" she asked. The boy hesitated. His eyes flicked past her, into the dimly lit house, then back again. "A woman at the bus station," he said. "She said you were kind." Evelyn almost laughed at the word kind. It felt like a description from another lifetime. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, opening the door a little wider.
Cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of snow. "Where were your parents?" The boy looked down at his shoes. One of the laces was frayed, the knot poorly tied. "I don't have any." The sentence landed softly, but its weight was unmistakable. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in," she said. "At least get warm." He stepped inside cautiously, as if she might change her mind. Evelyn closed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the quiet house. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucas," he replied. She handed him a towel for his hair and pointed him toward the heater vent in the living room. As he sat down, holding his hands out to the warmth, Evelyn studied him from a distance. There was something familiar in the way he carried himself, guarded, watchful, older than his years. "Where were you headed?" Lucas shrugged. "Anywhere that's not where I was." Evelyn understood that answer more than she cared to admit. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Maple Street in white. Inside the small house, two strangers sat in quiet uncertainty, unaware that this unexpected meeting on an ordinary December night had already begun to change the shape of both of their lives. And though neither of them could see it yet, something long buried beneath grief and survival had started to stir. Hope, fragile and hesitant, had found its way back to the door.
The morning light broke slowly over Maple Street, filtering through frost-lined windows and casting pale patterns across Evelyn's living room floor. Lucas stirred on the couch where he had fallen asleep, wrapped in a faded blanket she had found in the linen closet. His small frame seemed almost fragile in its oversized sweater, yet there was a quiet resilience about him, a certain alertness even in slumber. Evelyn watched him from the kitchen doorway, holding a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The house smelled faintly of snow and old pine, traces of last year's decorations still tucked in corners, and the warmth of the heater was enough to make the room feel alive again. She had never expected a child to appear at her door like this, not in her orderly, predictable life. Yet here he was, a reminder that the world could still intrude on grief in the most unexpected ways. She placed the coffee on the counter and busied herself with breakfast, though her hands shook slightly. Scrambled eggs and toast, the simplest meal, but she took her time, letting the aroma fill the room. She wasn't sure if it was for herself or to convince Lucas that this small corner of the world was safe, at least for a morning. Lucas stirred again, his eyes half open, blinking against the morning light. When he finally sat up, he hugged his knees, as if the warmth of the blanket alone could protect him. He looked at Evelyn, eyes wide, the kind of cautious curiosity that comes from learning to trust slowly, almost painfully. "Breakfast," Evelyn said softly. "Eggs, toast, coffee? Well, no coffee for you." He blinked, then let out a small, hesitant laugh, the kind of sound that had not been heard in her house for years. It was fragile, like a sparrow testing its wings. Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. "Do you live around here?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Lucas shook his head. "No, I was staying with my aunt until yesterday." His words tumbled out in uneven fragments. She said I had to leave, that she couldn't take care of me anymore." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the spatula she was holding. She had imagined many ways this night could begin, but none of them involved a boy suddenly appearing on her doorstep carrying a story so much like the ones she had read about in hospital hallways. She had always wanted to help. She had always wanted to matter. But grief had made her feel frozen, incapable of reaching beyond the small circle of her own existence. Yet here, now, she could do something. She could act. "Did anyone else know you were coming here?" she asked, trying to measure her next steps. Lucas shook his head again, his lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he seemed ready to retreat, to vanish back into the winter air outside. But Evelyn had seen the hesitation, the hope mingled with fear, and it was enough to guide her next words. "You can stay for now," she said, soft but firm. "I can't promise a lot, but at least you'll be safe." Lucas blinked, surprise written clearly across his face. The word safe seemed almost foreign, and yet he repeated it quietly, testing the sound. "Safe. Yes, safe."
They ate breakfast in silence, the only sounds the clinking of utensils and the soft hum of the heater. Evelyn noticed the way Lucas ate slowly, carefully, as if each bite had to be rationed, and it reminded her of her daughter, Emily, years ago, before tragedy had reshaped her life. Memories she had tried to bury bubbled to the surface. Emily's laugh echoing in the empty house, the soft sound of her small feet on the hardwood floors. She pushed them aside, focusing instead on Lucas, on the reality in front of her. After breakfast, Lucas curled up on the couch again, pulling the blanket tightly around him. Evelyn moved to the living room, pretending to tidy, but really watching him, feeling the quiet tension of someone learning to trust. She had been through enough nights alone to recognize the signs of a child carrying too much inside. Hours passed. The sunlight grew brighter, melting some of the frost outside. Evelyn eventually went to her room to change out of her night shift clothes, leaving Lucas with a small stack of coloring books she had dug out from a closet years ago. He didn't touch them immediately, but he did glance at the pages, as if testing whether this house would allow him to be a child again for even a few hours. By afternoon, the first flakes of real snow began to fall, thick and soft, covering the street in a gentle white blanket. Lucas moved to the window, pressing his small hands against the glass. For a moment, Evelyn watched him without speaking, letting the quiet stretch comfortably between them. He didn't ask for toys, for games, or for attention. He simply watched, and in that watching, she understood that he was learning what it meant to feel safe in a world that had so often let him down. Evelyn sat beside him on the window seat, a quiet presence rather than a teacher or guardian. They watched the snow fall together, letting it fill the room with an unspoken promise that, for now, nothing outside could touch them. The street was empty, the world muffled under its snowy cloak, and in that quiet she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "Do you like snow?" she asked after a while. Lucas looked at her, then back at the window. I I don't remember," he said softly. Evelyn smiled saintly. "It's okay, you'll remember again." The afternoon turned to evening. Evelyn started preparing a simple dinner: chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, listening to the occasional crackle from the fireplace she had rarely used. Lucas wandered the small house, inspecting corners and furniture, learning silently where he might fit into this strange new world. He seemed cautious but curious, a combination that spoke volumes about the resilience of children who had endured more than they should. Dinner was quiet but warm. Lucas tried to make conversation, small questions about her life, her job, even the odd comment about the snow. Evelyn answered as best she could, carefully, aware that every word carried weight, every tone shaped the fragile trust forming between them. She could see him beginning to relax, though only in small increments, the way a plant might slowly tilt towards sunlight after months of neglect. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Lucas settled in a chair by the fireplace, while Evelyn pulled her own into the corner, keeping him within view. They didn't speak much, letting the quiet of the night fill the spaces between them. Occasionally, she would glance at him, noting the way his eyes seemed to track shadows and light, the small motions of his hands as he fidgeted with the blanket, and the way he seemed simultaneously vulnerable and remarkably strong. Later, when the night deepened and the cold crept into the corners of the house, Lucas finally spoke again. "Do you have a Christmas tree?" His voice was almost a whisper, hesitant, as if asking permission for a hope he wasn't sure he deserved. Evelyn froze. The question caught her off guard, a reminder of the life she had abandoned, of the traditions she had set aside after Daniel's death. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers gripping each other tightly. She thought of the boxes in the hallway closet, of ornaments and lights that had gone untouched for years, gathering dust while the world outside moved on without her. But when she looked at Lucas, small, hopeful, unaware of the weight of grief, she realized that some doors, once opened, could not be closed again. "Yes," she said, finally, her voice soft but steady. "I have a tree. It's in the closet." Lucas' eyes widened. "Can we, maybe, put it up?" he asked, almost shyly. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we can do that." For the first time in years, she felt the spark of anticipation in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater and everything to do with the quiet miracle of a boy appearing on her doorstep on a snowy December night. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Maple Street in white. Inside, the small house smelled faintly of pine, of hope, of new beginnings. And though neither Evelyn nor Lucas could see what the future held, they both understood that sometimes the smallest acts, the offering of a warm meal, a safe place, the simple invitation to exist, could be the start of something miraculous. And in that moment, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the world could still hold magic.
The next morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of Lucas humming softly from the living room. The small melody was barely audible over the hiss of the radiator, but it carried a weight of innocence she hadn't realized she missed. For a moment, she paused, listening to the simple sound, letting it settle around her like a fragile promise that life could be different, even if only for a little while. Lucas was at the window again, watching the snow. He had pulled the blanket around his shoulders, though the morning sun had begun to melt some of the frost on the panes. His hands moved absent-mindedly over the soft fabric as he hummed, eyes wide and thoughtful, taking in the slow, quiet world outside. Evelyn dressed quickly, choosing comfort over style. Jeans, a sweater, her old boots. She moved with purpose, making coffee and scanning the small kitchen for ingredients. She wanted breakfast ready before he came into the room fully, before his small curiosity turned into questions she might not be prepared to answer. She wasn't sure why she felt this way, some instinct, perhaps, that a child's presence demanded preparation, safety, care. "Morning," Lucas said when he finally turned from the window. His eyes, still puffy from sleep, held a quiet curiosity, the kind that comes from stepping into a world that is, for the first time in a long time, safe and predictable. "Good morning," she replied. She tried to keep her voice light, careful, as though her tone alone could reassure him. "Coffee?" He shook his head. "Tea, if you have it." She smiled faintly. Tea was a rare treat she kept for herself, but she could find a way to make it work. As she prepared it, she watched him lean against the window frame, a small figure in a house that had been empty too long. "Lucas?" she started, then paused, unsure how to continue. Words about family, loss, safety, they all felt heavy, unnecessary, like pulling a thread that could unravel everything fragile between them. Instead, she decided on something simpler. "Do you like pancakes?" His face lit up just slightly, a careful smile, almost shy. "Yes," he said. Breakfast was quiet but comfortable. The small clatter of utensils, the hum of the heater, and the soft snow falling outside made the room feel suspended in time, as though the rest of the world could wait. Evelyn watched Lucas eat slowly, deliberately, noting the small details, the way he smoothed crumbs from the plate, the way he sipped his tea as if tasting warmth itself. After breakfast, she suggested they put up the Christmas tree. Lucas's eyes brightened immediately, the first true spark of excitement she had seen. They carried the small artificial tree from the closet into the living room, placing it in front of the window. Lucas helped, carefully unfolding branches, adjusting them to stand straight. He moved slowly, almost reverently, as though he understood the importance of the ritual without fully knowing why. Evelyn unpacked the ornaments, each one bringing a memory. She handled them delicately, brushing off dust, whispering fragments of past Christmases into the air. Her daughter's laugh, Daniel's playful teasing, her own quiet awe at the lights. Lucas watched, his hands folded neatly in front of him, listening. "You have a lot of memories," he said finally. "Yes," I admitted. "Some happy, some hard to remember." He nodded. "I know about hard memories." That simple statement held more weight than she could explain. She realized that he too carried pieces of a life that had left him scarred and careful. He hadn't asked for pity or questions, he simply acknowledged the truth of it. Evelyn felt a quiet kinship forming, unspoken and fragile, the kind that sometimes changes the trajectory of a life.
They strung lights across the tree, one strand at a time. Lucas's small hands fumbled occasionally, tangling the cords, but Evelyn guided him patiently. Each bulb they lit seemed to push the shadows back just a little, illuminating the room with soft warmth. Lucas's eyes widened at the first glow, a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's pretty," he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. "Very pretty." Next came the ornaments. Lucas placed them carefully on the branches, each one chosen with surprising thoughtfulness. A red bauble here, a gold one there. He paused often, studying the tree as if considering the weight of every decision. Evelyn realized that for him, this was more than decoration. It was a chance to control something in a world that had often felt uncontrollable. When they finished, they stood back and admired their work. The tree was simple, modest, but somehow perfect. It reflected the quiet patience and care of two people learning to rebuild trust in a world that had already demanded too much of them. "I like it," Lucas said softly, then added, almost to himself, "It feels like home." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. The word carried weight, a fragile but undeniable truth. For the first time since Daniel died, her home felt more than just walls and furniture. It was alive again, because someone else believed it could be. The afternoon passed in similar quiet harmony. They played card games, read books, and sipped hot cocoa by the window. Lucas asked questions about her life, and she answered as honestly as she could, without overwhelming him. She asked about him, too, careful to listen rather than judge. When evening fell, the snow outside had turned the world into a soft, white expanse. Lucas helped her place a small stocking on the mantel, his fingers brushing against hers occasionally, tentative but not afraid. The warmth of shared tasks, of simple acts, began to knit the edges of their loneliness together. Later, Evelyn found herself standing in the kitchen, watching Lucas trace his fingers along the frosted window pane. His breath fogged the glass, leaving small clouds that he would smile at and then wipe away. She realized with a start that she hadn't felt this alive, this present in years, not since before tragedy had reshaped her life. "Lucas," she said softly, "would you like to stay tonight? Just for tonight?" He turned to her, eyes wide, hope flickering. "Can I?" "Yes," she said firmly. "You can." For a long moment, they simply looked at one another, two people bound by circumstances neither had chosen, but who had now found each other. The house felt warm, safe, alive. And in that moment, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that miracles, quiet, small, and impossible to ignore, could still happen in the world if only someone was willing to open the door and let them in. And outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, covering Maple Street in white, as if the world itself wanted to give these two strangers the chance to find warmth, hope, and perhaps a family reborn.
The night had settled over Maple Street like a soft blanket, muffling sounds and transforming the world into a quiet, silvered version of itself. Inside Evelyn's house, the small Christmas tree twinkled with soft, warm light, casting gentle shadows across the living room walls. Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully examining one of the ornaments they had placed earlier. His fingers traced the smooth surface of a tiny golden bell, and for a brief moment his eyes seemed distant, as if listening to memories no one else could hear. Evelyn, standing in the kitchen, prepared tea and quietly observed him. There was a stillness to these moments that she had not anticipated, a fragile calm she was beginning to cherish. She had expected chaos, questions, perhaps even rebellion, but Lucas's presence had introduced a surprising serenity. He moved with caution, spoke with care, and yet beneath that careful exterior, there was a hunger for connection she could see, even in small gestures. "Lucas," she began softly, carrying two steaming mugs to the couch, "do you want to tell me a little about yourself?" He looked up, startled. His dark eyes met hers, wide and uncertain. Evelyn sat beside him, careful not to overwhelm. She had learned that patience was more powerful than insistence. I I don't really know where to start, he said finally. His voice was quiet, hesitant, as though testing the waters of a world he had long believed was untrustworthy. Start wherever you want, she said gently. I'm listening. He took a deep breath, the faint trace of the snow's cold lingering in his hair and on his coat. I was with my mom, well, my aunt, actually. She took care of me for a while, but she said I had to leave. I didn't do anything wrong. I just had to go. Evelyn nodded, letting the silence stretch as he found his words. She had learned to wait. Children, especially ones like Lucas, needed space to process pain before sharing it. My dad, I don't really know him, he continued, looking down at his hands. I've tried to remember, but he trailed off, shivering slightly despite the warmth of the room. Evelyn reached out, gently placing her hand near his. It's okay, she whispered. You don't have to tell me everything right now. Lucas's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. He nodded and leaned back against the couch, curling into the blanket. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to simply exist, to be safe. Evelyn realized this was the first step in their fragile journey together, the recognition that someone else could be trusted, that the world was not entirely cruel. After a while, the conversation drifted naturally to lighter things, the snow outside, the ornaments on the tree, and the small traditions Evelyn remembered from past Christmases. Lucas listened, occasionally offering shy comments, his laughter soft but genuine. Each small sound, each small gesture reinforced the fragile bond forming between them. Later that night, Evelyn prepared the small guest room for Lucas. She had pulled fresh sheets from the closet and fluffed the pillows, trying to create a sense of normalcy and comfort. Lucas entered the room cautiously, examining it as if testing its boundaries. This is nice, he said quietly. I haven't had a bed like this in a long time. Evelyn smiled softly. Then you can stay here tonight, and as long as you want, Lucas. No one will ask you to leave. He nodded, a small weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to believe in safety, in care, in a world that could still offer kindness without strings attached. As she left the room, Evelyn paused at the door, watching him settle under the covers. She felt a pang of something she hadn't expected, protectiveness, a quiet sense of responsibility, and the realization that this boy had entered her life at a moment when she herself had been fragile, when grief had made her world small and colorless. Sleep came slowly that night, both for Evelyn and Lucas. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the heater mingling with the distant sounds of snow shifting outside. Evelyn lay in bed, thinking about the past, about Daniel, and about the sudden intrusion of hope that Lucas represented. She had believed for a long time that miracles were rare, that kindness was fleeting, but this boy, small, cautious, resilient, had already begun to change that perception. Meanwhile, Lucas drifted in and out of sleep, his thoughts wandering to memories of his mother, of fleeting moments of warmth and care, and to the strange, new comfort he felt in Evelyn's house. He didn't yet understand the depth of what was happening, the way trust was slowly being built, but he felt it nonetheless, a quiet certainty that he was, for the first time in a long while, where he was meant to be. The next morning, the snow had deepened, covering the world in a thick, pristine blanket. The street outside was nearly empty, save for the occasional car making its careful way through the white expanse. Lucas and Evelyn moved through the morning with a sense of rhythm, preparing breakfast, chatting softly, and enjoying the small rituals that had begun to define their days. During breakfast, Lucas asked a question that caught Evelyn slightly off guard. "Do you ever get lonely?" he asked, looking down at his plate. Evelyn paused, thinking carefully before answering. "I did," she admitted quietly, "for a long time. After Daniel died, I felt like the world had left me behind.
but I've learned that loneliness can be softened by reaching out, by allowing someone in." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. I've been alone a lot too." His voice carried a quiet sadness, a testament to the life he had endured. Evelyn reached across the table, lightly resting her hand near his. "You're not alone anymore, Lucas. Not here." He looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time with something close to hope. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, fragile but genuine. In that small gesture, Evelyn felt the beginnings of a miracle, the slow, patient weaving of two damaged lives into something new, something warm. After breakfast, they bundled up and stepped outside into the snow. Lucas's boots crunched against the frozen ground as he ran ahead, leaving small footprints that Evelyn followed. They built a small snowman together, laughing quietly at the simple joys, at the novelty of living in a world where they could create happiness even amid lingering pain. That afternoon, as the sky darkened and the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights reflected off the snow outside, Evelyn began to understand something profound. Miracles often arrived not as grand gestures, but as small, quiet acts of care, persistence, and patience. Lucas's presence, tentative and uncertain, was already reshaping her world, restoring color to corners long thought gray. She watched him sit by the window, a small figure bathed in soft light, and felt a cautious optimism take root in her heart. The past could not be erased. Grief would never fully disappear, but there was room, finally, for warmth, for connection, for a sense of hope that she had almost forgotten existed. As night fell over Maple Street, Lucas and Evelyn sat together, sharing stories, sipping cocoa, and letting the soft hum of the heater and the twinkle of the Christmas tree weave a fragile cocoon around them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, silent, and serene, as if protecting them from the chaos that once defined their lives. And in that quiet, gentle space, both Evelyn and Lucas understood something that neither had dared to hope before. Sometimes miracles didn't arrive with a roar. They arrived softly, patiently, in the quietest moments. And when they did, they had the power to change everything.
The morning arrived with a pale sun barely breaking through heavy gray clouds. The world outside was quiet, a soft hush that seemed to press against the windows and linger in the corners of Evelyn's house. Lucas stirred at the edge of the living room, still wrapped in the oversized blanket he had claimed the night before. His eyes were bright but tired, the faint shadows of worry lingering underneath. Evelyn watched him from the kitchen, stirring oatmeal on the stove. She had taken to small rituals now, making breakfast, ensuring he was warm, giving him space to adjust. It was a delicate balance, and she had learned that patience was the strongest form of care. "Morning," she said softly, placing a bowl in front of him. "Morning," Lucas replied, his voice quiet. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the soft clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional sigh from the heater as it warmed the room. Evelyn's mind wandered, as it often did in these quiet moments, to the fragility of this peace. She knew that the outside world was unpredictable, and she feared the moment when it might intrude. It didn't take long for that moment to arrive. A loud knock on the front door shattered the morning calm. Lucas flinched, his small body stiffening as he glanced at Evelyn. She moved cautiously toward the door, trying to prepare herself for whatever intrusion awaited. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark coat, his expression serious, almost stern. Evelyn's heart tightened. Something about his posture, the deliberate way he stood, sent a ripple of unease through her. She opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man didn't introduce himself immediately. Instead, he looked past her, his gaze landing briefly on Lucas, who had edged closer to Evelyn. Finally, he spoke. "Are you Evelyn Carter?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "My name is Detective Harris. We need to talk about Lucas." Evelyn's chest tightened. She had known that this day might come, though she hadn't expected it to arrive so soon, so abruptly.
Her mind raced, weighing the options, calculating how to protect Lucas without causing panic. "About Lucas? What about him?" she asked carefully. The detective's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "He's currently listed as a runaway. We've been trying to locate him, and someone reported that he might be staying here." Lucas's small voice trembled as he spoke. I I didn't run away." Evelyn stepped closer to him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said gently. "I understand." Detective Harris nodded, as if acknowledging her assurance, but there was still an official weight in his posture. "I need to make sure he's safe. Can we go over a few questions?" Evelyn glanced at Lucas. His eyes were bright, fear flickering beneath the surface. She knelt to his level, trying to offer comfort. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." Lucas nodded slowly, still uncertain. Evelyn turned back to the detective. "We can talk," she said firmly, "but he's been through a lot. Please be gentle." Detective Harris gestured for them to step inside. Evelyn led them to the living room, where the soft glow of the Christmas tree contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. Lucas remained close to her, gripping the blanket tightly, his small hands trembling. As the detective asked questions, Evelyn answered carefully, providing facts but avoiding unnecessary details that might alarm Lucas further. She explained where she had found him, how long he had been in her care, and the circumstances of his arrival. Throughout the questioning, Lucas remained quiet, listening, absorbing, but not speaking unless spoken to. Evelyn could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the fear of being taken away, the uncertainty of trusting someone else again. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, Detective Harris finally leaned back in his chair. His expression had softened considerably, though the professional edge remained. "I see that you're providing a safe environment. We'll need to contact the Child Services Department to ensure proper protocols are followed, but I can tell you genuinely care about him." Evelyn nodded, relief mingling with lingering anxiety. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's all I want, for him to be safe and happy." The detective rose, preparing to leave. "He'll be in touch. Make sure he doesn't go anywhere else for now." As the front door closed, Lucas let out a small, shaky breath. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. "See?" she whispered. "Nothing's changed. You're safe. I promise." He buried his face in her shoulder, silent tears streaking his cheeks. Evelyn held him longer than she had intended, letting the moment stretch, letting the comfort sink in. After a while, Lucas pulled back, wiping his eyes. I don't want to go anywhere else," he said softly. "You won't," Evelyn reassured him. "Not if I can help it. You're staying here, with me, for as long as you need." The rest of the day passed slowly, filled with quiet routines meant to rebuild a sense of normalcy after the tension of the morning. They played board games, read stories by the fire, and sipped cocoa, all in the effort to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Yet Evelyn knew that the world outside was not so easily controlled. She understood that love and trust were fragile, that miracles did not always come without obstacles. The detective's visit was a reminder that life could intrude at any moment, that safety was never guaranteed. That night, as she prepared Lucas's bed, Evelyn sat beside him, holding his hand gently. "You've been very brave today," she said softly. Lucas nodded, resting his head on the pillow. I just don't want to lose this," he murmured. "You won't," Evelyn whispered. "We'll face whatever comes together, you and me." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Maple Street in white. Inside, the small house glowed with warmth, resilience, and the quiet determination of two people learning to trust again. Evelyn knew that challenges would come, official procedures, past family issues, the complexity of life, but for the first time in years, she believed that they could face them together. The miracle she had allowed herself to hope for was no longer just a distant dream. It was alive, fragile but undeniable, in the shared moments, the whispered promises, and the silent understanding that sometimes home was found in the most unexpected of places. And as the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Evelyn realized that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a while, she felt ready to walk it, one careful, hopeful step at a time.
The snow outside had stopped, leaving Maple Street quiet and still, coated in a thick layer of white. Morning light filtered through the frost on the windows, painting the living room in soft, muted colors. Evelyn moved around the house with a calm efficiency she hadn't felt in years, preparing breakfast and tidying the small spaces that suddenly seemed full of life because Lucas was there. Lucas was at the kitchen table, sketching quietly on a pad of paper Evelyn had found in a drawer. His hand moved with careful precision, and she watched him, intrigued by the intensity in his eyes. It wasn't the hurried scribble of a child bored or restless. It was deliberate, thoughtful, almost meditative. She felt a pang of admiration for his focus, for the way he could lose himself in something simple and beautiful, even amid the chaos his life had known. "You've got quite the talent," she said softly, leaning over to look at his work. Lucas glanced up, eyes meeting hers. "It's nothing," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Just shapes." Evelyn smiled. "Shapes can be everything," she replied. "They can tell stories, capture feelings, sometimes more than words." He nodded, turning back to his sketches. She let him continue, knowing that sometimes silence spoke louder than conversation. After breakfast, Evelyn suggested they go for a walk. The crisp air outside was refreshing, the kind that cleared the mind and brought a sense of calm. Lucas bundled himself carefully in his coat and scarf, moving with the careful precision of someone used to guarding himself against the world. They walked through the quiet streets, the snow crunching underfoot. The world felt almost untouched, frozen in a delicate balance between past and present. Evelyn noticed the way Lucas observed everything, the way he tilted his head at the shadows, how he paused to examine footprints in the snow, how his hands were constantly moving, fidgeting with the edges of his scarf or the straps of his backpack. "You like being outside?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Lucas nodded. "It's peaceful," he said. "I don't have to think about stuff all the time." Evelyn understood that unspoken stuff referred to the weight of his past, the things he carried with him silently. She felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to shield him from every harsh word, every harsh truth. But she also knew that she couldn't control the world, only the small moments within it, the gestures of care, the small acts of kindness that reminded him he wasn't alone. They reached the park at the end of the street, a small open space surrounded by towering evergreens dusted with snow. Lucas's eyes lit up at the sight of it, a spark of curiosity and wonder breaking through the lingering shadows of caution. "Want to build a snow fort?" she asked, trying to inject a playful tone into the morning. Lucas hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. They began to work together, shoveling snow and shaping it into walls, laughing softly when the snow collapsed unexpectedly. Evelyn felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't realized she missed, the kind of joy that comes from simple, shared tasks, from laughter unguarded and genuine. Lucas's smiles were shy but frequent, each one a reminder that even the smallest gestures could carry profound weight. As they worked, Lucas paused and looked at Evelyn, his expression unusually serious for a child so young. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked quietly. Evelyn froze, considering her answer carefully. "All the time," she admitted softly. "But fear doesn't have to control you. It can remind you to be careful, to be kind, to take care of the people you love." Lucas nodded, digesting her words. "I'm scared a lot," he admitted. "But I want to be brave too." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. There was honesty in those words, a courage she recognized, even if it was mixed with the tremors of fear. She reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You are brave," she said, "even when you don't realize it." After they finished the fort, they sat on a nearby bench, sipping the hot cocoa Evelyn had brought in a thermos. The quiet of the park, the soft crunch of snow underfoot,
and the warm drink in their hands created a cocoon of serenity. For a moment, it felt like nothing could touch them, like the world beyond the park didn't exist. But the outside world had a way of intruding, no matter how carefully one tried to preserve peace. As they prepared to head back home, a car slowed at the edge of the park. A man stepped out, his expression guarded, professional. Evelyn recognized him immediately, Detective Harris. "Good morning," he said, his tone measured. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I need a few more details about Lucas. Just routine follow-up questions. Nothing to worry about." Lucas stiffened, instinctively moving closer to Evelyn. She placed a hand on his back, offering reassurance. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'll be right here." The detective's presence was a reminder that their sanctuary, as fragile as it was, could never be fully insulated from reality. Evelyn could see the uncertainty flicker across Lucas's face, the quiet tension that came from a life lived on the edge, constantly adjusting to forces beyond his control. They answered the detective's questions together, Evelyn guiding Lucas gently through each answer, ensuring he felt safe and heard. It was slow work, requiring patience, care, and constant reassurance. Yet by the end, the detective's expression softened. "You're providing a safe environment. I can tell he's being cared for. Just make sure nothing changes suddenly." As the man left, Lucas exhaled quietly. "I don't like him," he muttered. Evelyn chuckled softly. "No one ever does, but we'll manage, together." Returning home, they found comfort in the small routines they had begun to establish. Lucas unpacked his sketches again, sharing details about the imaginary worlds he had created, and Evelyn listened, offering quiet encouragement and admiration. The house, once silent and lonely, hummed with life, muted but steady, a sanctuary in a world that had often been unkind. As night fell, Evelyn tucked Lucas into bed, sitting beside him for a while longer than usual. "You've been very brave today," she whispered. Lucas looked at her, eyes wide and uncertain. I want to stay here," he murmured. "You will. We'll face everything together. No one can take that from us." The snow continued to cover the streets outside, soft and insulating, as if the world itself was holding them in a protective embrace. Evelyn knew that challenges were inevitable, that life would continue to intrude, but for the first time in years, she believed that they could weather whatever came, together, patiently and with hope. And in that quiet house, filled with the soft glow of the Christmas tree and the warmth of shared trust, a small miracle began to take root. It was quiet, tentative, fragile, but undeniable. The kind of miracle that slowly changes everything, one moment, one act of care at a time.
The house was quiet that morning, bathed in the soft, golden light of the rising sun. Outside, the remnants of the snowfall glistened on the sidewalks, trees, and rooftops, turning Maple Street into a winter wonderland. Evelyn moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast while listening for any sound of Lucas stirring. She found herself glancing at the clock frequently, though not because she was in a rush. She simply wanted to know that the morning had begun safely, that the day could unfold without surprise, without intrusion. Lucas emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, still sleepy-eyed but visibly curious about the day ahead. He rubbed his arms against the warmth of his sweater and smiled faintly at Evelyn. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," Evelyn replied, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. "I hope you're hungry." He nodded and began to eat, careful with each bite, as though savoring the small comfort of a routine he hadn't known he needed. Evelyn watched him for a moment, feeling a quiet swell of protectiveness and something akin to relief. He was safe here, for now. After breakfast, Evelyn suggested they work on decorating the tree a little more. Lucas brightened at the idea, eyes lighting up with excitement that was almost childlike in its sincerity. He ran to the closet to grab the remaining ornaments, while Evelyn untangled the last of the string lights. They worked side by side, sharing quiet conversation and soft laughter.
Evelyn had begun to notice the small ways Lucas's personality revealed itself, the meticulous way he arranged ornaments, the fleeting jokes he made, and the genuine delight he showed when a string of lights finally stayed untangled. These were moments of normalcy, moments that were healing both for Lucas and for herself. As the afternoon approached, Evelyn glanced at the calendar on the wall. She had marked the days carefully, noting small tasks and appointments, but she hesitated before adding anything about her own life, anything that might remind Lucas of the outside world's demands. She had promised him stability, and she intended to keep it for as long as possible. But the outside world was not so easily kept at bay. A knock at the door interrupted their activity, sudden and deliberate. Evelyn stiffened. It was the kind of knock that carried authority, the kind that demanded attention. She glanced at Lucas, who froze mid-step, clutching a small ornament. His eyes widened with apprehension. Evelyn opened the door to reveal a woman in a neatly pressed coat, her badge glinting faintly in the afternoon light. "Hello, Evelyn Carter?" the woman asked, her tone formal but not unkind. "Yes," Evelyn replied, cautiously. "I'm from Child Services." She stepped forward slightly. "We've been informed that you're caring for Lucas." Lucas stepped back, instinctively moving behind Evelyn. I I don't want to go," he whispered, his voice trembling. Evelyn reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll handle this. Just stay close to me." The caseworker explained that she needed to conduct a routine check, verify Lucas's safety, and discuss his temporary living arrangements. Evelyn listened carefully, responding honestly without revealing more than necessary. She described the day-to-day routines she had established, the care she provided, and the steps she had taken to ensure Lucas felt safe and supported. Lucas sat quietly, clutching the blanket he had brought to the living room, watching the adult conversation with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He didn't speak unless prompted, but Evelyn could see the tension in his small frame, the anxiety that came from years of instability and uncertainty. After what felt like hours, but was actually closer to an hour, the caseworker finally leaned back, her expression softening. "I can see that Lucas is being cared for and that he feels safe here. I'll need to file a report, of course, but I can tell you genuinely care for him." Evelyn exhaled slowly, relief mingling with lingering tension. "Thank you," she said quietly. Once the caseworker left, Lucas exhaled and slumped into the couch, his shoulders heavy with the release of pent-up fear. Evelyn sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his small frame. "See?" she whispered. "Nothing's changed. You're safe, I promise." Lucas rested his head on her shoulder, finally allowing himself to relax. "I'm glad I found you," he murmured. Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm glad I found you too," she whispered. The rest of the day passed in quiet routine. They worked on the final ornaments, strung garlands along the fireplace, and even attempted a small, improvised wreath. The warmth of the house, the gentle hum of the heater, and the soft glow of the Christmas tree created a cocoon of safety, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that had filled their days until now. But as evening fell, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the peace was fragile. She had faced intrusion from the outside world twice in the span of a few days, first from Detective Harris and now from the caseworker. She knew that Lucas's past was complex, that external authorities had to be involved, yet the weight of bureaucracy threatened to overshadow the fragile trust they were building. Still, Evelyn refused to let fear dictate their lives. She reminded herself that each small act of care, each moment of laughter and connection was a building block in creating a sense of stability for Lucas. She would face whatever challenges came, one careful step at a time, protecting this boy who had already endured so much. That night, as she tucked Lucas into bed, she spoke softly about the day. "You were brave today," she said. Lucas looked up at her, eyes wide. "I'm scared sometimes," he admitted. "I know," Evelyn said. "Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you keep going even when you are." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. The small smile that tugged at the corners of his mouth was fragile, but it was a start, a hint of hope, a glimmer of trust. Evelyn stayed by his side for a few more minutes, holding his hand, watching him breathe steadily before finally leaving the room. Outside, the snow had thickened again, covering Maple Street in a pristine white. Inside, the house glowed with warmth, safety, and the quiet determination of two people learning to navigate a world that had often been unkind. And in that still, glowing space, Evelyn realized something profound. Miracles were not always grand or sudden. Sometimes they were small, quiet, and cumulative, built through patience, care, and the courage to open one's heart despite fear. Lucas, sleeping peacefully now, was living proof that even fragile lives could find hope again, that even the smallest gestures of trust and love could create something miraculous. And Evelyn, watching him, felt the weight of that truth settle softly around her heart, a promise that together they could weather whatever storms lay ahead.
The morning light crept slowly into the living room, falling across the small Christmas tree that had begun to glow brighter with each passing day. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and watching Lucas as he carefully arranged a new set of decorations they had unpacked the night before. There was a quiet reverence in the way he handled each ornament, as though each one carried a memory he longed to claim for himself. "You're very focused this morning," Evelyn said softly, smiling. Lucas looked up, a small, proud grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I want it to look perfect," he replied quietly. I I want it to feel like home." Evelyn's chest tightened. She had never heard him speak with such certainty before, such ownership of a moment, a space, a feeling. It was a sign, she realized, that he was beginning to feel safe, beginning to believe that home could exist again, even if it was fragile and new. After breakfast, Evelyn suggested a walk into town to pick up a few supplies for the upcoming holiday. Lucas brightened at the idea, wrapping his scarf tightly around his neck, his small hands stuffed into mittens. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the faint smoke from chimneys. As they walked, Lucas spoke quietly about small things, school, his favorite drawings, and stories about places he had never truly been. Evelyn listened, offering encouragement and laughter, carefully avoiding any mention of past hardships that might disrupt his fragile sense of peace. They arrived at the small local store, decorated with garlands and twinkling lights. The warmth of the interior was welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold streets outside. Lucas's eyes widened as he took in the displays, the colorful ribbons, and the assortment of holiday treats. Evelyn let him wander, keeping a watchful eye from a short distance. She could see his excitement, tempered with caution, the same caution that had become second nature after years of instability. He approached a small display of handmade ornaments, picking one up delicately. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "It's perfect for someone who cares about small details." He looked at her, a question in his eyes that went unspoken. Evelyn understood. This trip was not just about decorations or supplies, it was about the world outside their safe bubble, about Lucas testing the waters, about slowly reclaiming a sense of normalcy he had long been denied. After gathering the items they needed, they returned home, the small car stuffed with decorations, treats, and the promise of shared moments. The house seemed to hum with anticipation as they unpacked the supplies, carefully placing each item where it could be enjoyed and appreciated. Lucas moved with purpose, his earlier excitement now tempered with focus, as though he understood the significance of creating a home filled with warmth and light. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Maple Street, Evelyn suggested they bake cookies together. Lucas's eyes lit up, and for the first time in days, I saw unrestrained joy in his expression. They measured ingredients, stirred dough, and shaped cookies with careful attention. Flour dusted the counter, their hands, and even the edges of Lucas's scarf. But laughter filled the room, fragile and sweet, like the first light of dawn breaking through long-held darkness. Once the cookies were in the oven, Evelyn pulled Lucas close and said softly, "You've done a wonderful job today. I'm proud of you." He looked up at her, small but earnest. "I feel happy. I I think this is the first time in a long time." Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had hoped for moments like this, quiet confirmations that trust and love could rebuild what had been lost. But hearing it directly from him made the impact even greater. She hugged him gently, holding him close, letting the warmth of the moment settle between them. As evening approached, Evelyn placed the freshly baked cookies on a plate, arranging them neatly beside the glowing Christmas tree. Lucas carefully placed a small ornament he had made himself near the top branch, a gesture both proud and tentative. "I think this is perfect," he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, "it's perfect." Feeling a swell of emotion she could not fully name. The night deepened, and the small house was filled with a calm warmth, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Evelyn tucked Lucas into bed, lingering a moment longer than usual. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes miracles don't come all at once. Sometimes they arrive slowly, in small moments, in trust and kindness, and I think we're seeing one right now." Lucas's eyes widened, hope and wonder mingling in their depths. "A miracle?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, "and it's ours. We just have to nurture it together." He smiled faintly, a fragile yet genuine expression, and closed his eyes. Evelyn stayed by his side for a while longer, watching him sleep, letting the quiet of the house and the gentle twinkle of the Christmas tree fill her heart with something she had almost forgotten: hope. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving a pristine white blanket across Maple Street. The world beyond their home was still uncertain, full of challenges and unpredictability, but within the walls of that small house, a miracle, small, quiet, and deeply profound, was taking root. Evelyn knew that the days ahead would test their trust, their patience, and their courage. There would be moments of fear, doubt, and intrusion, but she also knew something else, something powerful. They had begun to create something unbreakable, a foundation built on care, resilience, and the shared belief that even in the darkest winters, light could be found. And as she watched Lucas breathe steadily in sleep, she allowed herself to imagine the possibilities: laughter filling the house, ornaments twinkling on the tree, and two souls, both marked by loss and pain, finding warmth, family, and the quiet magic of a Christmas miracle that was only just beginning. The days leading up to Christmas passed more quickly than Evelyn expected. Each morning brought a quiet rhythm that had slowly become familiar: coffee brewing in the kitchen, Lucas shuffling in with sleep still clinging to his eyes, the soft glow of the Christmas tree greeting them both. What once felt temporary was beginning to feel dangerously close to permanent, and that thought both comforted and frightened her. Lucas had started asking questions, small ones at first. Questions about how long Christmas lasted, whether snow always came back every year, and what happened after holidays ended. Evelyn answered gently, carefully choosing words that wouldn't break the fragile sense of security he had built. Still, she could sense the worry behind his curiosity. He was learning what happiness felt like again, and with it came the fear of losing it. One afternoon, while Lucas sat on the floor coloring, Evelyn's phone rang. The sound was sharp, intrusive, slicing through the calm of the house. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach tighten. It was Child Services. She stepped into the kitchen, lowering her voice. The woman on the other end spoke politely but firmly, explaining that Lucas's case was moving forward faster than expected. There were discussions of placement, evaluations, and long-term decisions that needed to be made. None of the words were cruel, yet each one landed heavily in Evelyn's chest. When the call ended, she leaned against the counter, steadying her breath. The house felt suddenly too quiet. Lucas noticed immediately. He always did. "Are we in trouble?" he asked from the living room, his voice small. Evelyn knelt in front of him, forcing a calm smile. "No," she said gently, "not at all. Sometimes grown-ups just have to talk about plans." He studied her face, searching for truth. "Plans without me?" Her heart broke at the question. She reached out, resting her hands on his shoulders. "Never without you," she said softly. That night, Lucas struggled to sleep. He tossed and turned, clutching his blanket, his eyes wide with worry. Evelyn sat beside his bed, humming softly, the same tune her husband once loved. "Do I have to leave after Christmas?" Lucas whispered. Evelyn froze. She hadn't realized how clearly he sensed the uncertainty. "I don't know yet," she admitted carefully, "but no matter what happens, you won't be alone." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "Everyone says that," he murmured. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I know," she said, "and I'm sorry people broke those promises before, but I'm still here, and I'm not giving up on you." He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. She stayed until his breathing slowed, until sleep finally claimed him. Later that night, Evelyn sat alone in the living room, staring at the Christmas tree. The ornaments reflected the lights in soft, trembling patterns. She thought about her empty house before Lucas arrived, about the grief that had settled into her bones after losing her husband. She hadn't planned for this, hadn't planned to care this deeply again. Yet here she was, terrified of losing a child who had quietly healed parts of her she didn't even know were broken. The next morning, Lucas seemed quieter than usual. He ate slowly, barely touching his pancakes. Evelyn decided they needed something normal, something grounding. She suggested they deliver cookies to a few neighbors. At first, Lucas hesitated. "What if they don't like me?" he asked. "They will," Evelyn said with certainty. "And even if they don't, that's okay. Kindness doesn't need permission." They bundled up and stepped outside, moving from house to house. Some neighbors smiled warmly, others offered polite thanks, but one elderly man surprised Lucas by kneeling down and thanking him personally. "These are the best cookies I've had in years," the man said, eyes shining. Lucas beamed, pride blooming across his face. It was a small moment, but it mattered. On their walk back, Lucas spoke softly. "If I have to go somewhere else, will you remember me?" Evelyn stopped walking. She knelt in front of him, snow soaking into her knees. "I could never forget you," she said firmly. "You're part of my story now." That night, Evelyn made a decision. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It settled quietly into her heart, heavy but certain. She would fight. For Lucas, for stability, for the fragile family they had created, whatever it took. As Christmas drew closer, the house glowed brighter, but beneath the warmth lay tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Would this miracle last, or was it only borrowed time? Lucas fell asleep that night, clutching a small ornament in his hand, one he had made himself. Evelyn watched him, silently promising that she would do everything in her power to make sure he never felt forgotten again. Outside, the snow fell softly once more, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting to see whether love would be enough to change what fate had already decided. The decision stayed with Evelyn through the night, heavy and unrelenting. She lay awake listening to the soft hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, her thoughts circling the same truth over and over again. Doing nothing was no longer an option. Loving Lucas meant risking heartbreak, bureaucracy, and the reopening of wounds she had spent years carefully sealing shut. By morning, her resolve had hardened into something steady. Lucas sensed the shift immediately. He always noticed changes in the air, in her posture, in the way she spoke. At breakfast, Evelyn smiled more deliberately, asked him about his drawings, and listened with a kind of attentiveness that felt intentional, almost urgent. "You okay?" Lucas asked, syrup smudged on his fingers. "I am, honestly, and I have something important to do today." His shoulders stiffened. "Is it about me?" "Yes," she admitted gently, "but not in a bad way." She explained that she needed to make a few phone calls, talk to some people who help children find safe homes. She didn't use big words or promises she couldn't guarantee. Instead, she spoke with honesty, telling him that sometimes adults had to speak up when something mattered. Lucas nodded, though worry lingered behind his eyes. "You're not tired of me, right?" The question landed like a blow. Evelyn knelt beside him and held his face carefully in her hands. "Never," she said firmly. "You didn't come into my life by accident." When Lucas went to his room to draw, Evelyn picked up the phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed child services. She asked questions she had been afraid to ask before, about long-term placement, about guardianship, about whether someone like her could offer permanence to a child like Lucas. The answers weren't simple. There were evaluations, home studies, background checks, interviews. There were no guarantees. But for the first time, Evelyn wasn't listening with fear. She was listening with purpose. Later that afternoon, she visited a small legal aid office downtown, the kind that helped people who didn't know where else to turn. Sitting across from a woman with kind eyes and a stack of folders, Evelyn told her story. She spoke about loss, about grief, about a boy who had wandered into her life and quietly changed everything. The woman listened without interruption. When Evelyn finished, there was a long pause. "You're not asking for something easy," she said gently, "but you're asking for something right." Those words stayed with Evelyn as she drove home. Lucas was waiting by the window, sketchbook in hand. "I made something for you," he said, holding it out carefully. It was a drawing of the house, snow-covered, lights glowing in the windows. Two figures stood outside, one tall, one small, side by side. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's us," Lucas said quietly. "I wanted to remember, just in case." Her heart broke and healed at the same time. She hugged him tightly, not caring if he felt how much she was shaking. That evening, Evelyn received an email. It confirmed what she already knew. Formal steps would begin immediately. There would be meetings after Christmas, decisions that could reshape both their lives. She didn't tell Lucas everything. Some truths were too heavy for a child to carry. Instead, she focused on the present, on dinner together, on hot chocolate, on reading aloud by the fire. As Christmas Eve approached, the house glowed brighter than ever, yet beneath the warmth ran a quiet tension. Lucas had begun sleeping with his backpack near his bed, a habit from before. Evelyn noticed but didn't comment. That night, Lucas asked softly, "If they say no, will this still have been real?" Evelyn took a long breath. "Yes," she said, "nothing can take that away. Love doesn't disappear just because someone tries to measure it." He nodded, comforted, but still afraid. After he fell asleep, Evelyn stood by the Christmas tree staring at the ornament Lucas had made. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling both fear and hope pulse together. She had opened herself to loss again, but she had also opened herself to something extraordinary, the chance to choose love, not because it was safe, but because it was right. Outside, church bells rang softly in the distance, announcing the arrival of Christmas Eve. The snow began to fall once more, gentle and quiet, as if blessing the fragile promise being formed inside that small house on Maple Street. For the first time in years, Evelyn whispered a prayer, not for certainty, but for courage, and somewhere deep inside her, she knew, whatever happened next, she would never regret choosing Lucas. Christmas morning arrived quietly, almost reverently, as though the world itself understood how fragile this day was meant to be. Snow rested gently on Maple Street, untouched and glowing beneath the pale winter sky. Inside the house, the Christmas tree shimmered softly, its lights still on from the night before, casting a warm glow over the living room. Evelyn woke early, as she always did now. For a moment, she lay still, listening. The house felt different on Christmas, full, expectant, alive. She rose slowly and padded into the living room, pausing before the tree. Beneath it sat a few carefully wrapped gifts, modest but chosen with intention. She had almost forgotten what Christmas felt like before grief hollowed it out, before silence replaced laughter, before love felt like something that had an expiration date. A soft sound behind her made her turn. Lucas stood in the doorway, clutching his blanket, eyes wide and uncertain. "Is it really Christmas?" he asked quietly. Evelyn smiled. "It is." He stepped closer, awe spreading across his face as he took in the lights, the presents, the warmth of the room. "I didn't think, I've never—" His voice trailed off. Evelyn knelt beside him. "You don't have to explain," she said gently. "Just be here." They sat together on the floor, opening gifts slowly. Lucas handled each one carefully, as if they might vanish if he moved too quickly. A sweater, a small art set, a book about constellations. With every gift, his smile grew more confident, more real. Then he handed Evelyn a small, unevenly wrapped box. "I made it," he said nervously. Inside was a simple ornament, 2 figures carved from clay, standing side by side beneath a small star. Evelyn couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision as she pulled him into her arms. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. For a brief, perfect moment, the world felt whole. Later, as they sat at the table eating cinnamon rolls, a knock came to the door. The sound shattered the warmth like a crack in glass. Lucas froze. His smile disappeared instantly. "They're here," he whispered. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she stood calmly. "Stay right here," she said, though she took his hand with her. At the door stood a man and a woman from Child Services, their expressions professional, restrained. They explained that due to scheduling and urgency, they needed to check in today. No decisions would be finalized yet, but assessments had to continue. Lucas's grip tightened around Evelyn's. Inside, the house suddenly felt smaller. The tree still glowed, the cookies still sat on the plate, but tension filled the air. The caseworker asked gentle questions, observed interactions, and took notes. Lucas answered when spoken to, his voice barely above a whisper. At one point, he blurted out, "I don't want to go." The room went silent. Evelyn knelt immediately. "Lucas," she said softly, "no one is taking you today." The caseworker nodded. "That's right. We're just here to understand what's best for you." "But this is what's best. This is my home." Evelyn felt her heart split open. After they left, Lucas collapsed into her arms, shaking. "I thought Christmas was supposed to be happy," he sobbed. She held him tightly. "It is," she said through her own tears, "but happy doesn't mean easy." That afternoon, they went for a walk, despite the cold. The neighborhood was quiet. Families gathered indoors, laughter drifting faintly through windows. Lucas kicked at the snow, silent and thoughtful. "Do you think," he asked finally, "that miracles can change minds?" Evelyn stopped walking. She crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I think miracles don't always look like magic. Sometimes they look like people choosing love again and again, even when it's hard." That night, they lit candles and sat quietly by the tree. Lucas leaned against her, exhausted but comforted. "Even if I have to go someday, this will still be my best Christmas." Evelyn closed her eyes, pain and gratitude twisting together in her chest.
Mine too, she whispered. When Lucas finally fell asleep, Evelyn stayed awake, staring at the tree, replaying every moment of the day. Christmas had come, not as a perfect miracle, but as a test, a reminder that love was fragile, brave, and worth fighting for. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and steady, and in that quiet house, beneath the glow of lights and the weight of uncertainty, something powerful settled into place. Love had shown itself, and it wasn't done yet.
The days after Christmas felt strangely quiet. The decorations still glowed, the tree still stood proudly in the corner of the living room, but something had shifted. The waiting had begun. Evelyn tried to keep life normal, breakfasts, drawing time, evening stories, but beneath every moment ran a quiet tension neither of them spoke aloud. Lucas had stopped keeping his backpack by the bed. That alone felt like a miracle. One cold morning, as snow fell lightly outside, Evelyn received the call she had been both dreading and hoping for. She listened in silence, her hand pressed tightly against the kitchen counter. When the call ended, she didn't move for a long moment. Lucas stood in the doorway, watching her face carefully. "Is it bad news?" he asked. Evelyn turned slowly, and for the first time since he'd met her, Lucas saw tears streaming freely down her face, tears mixed with a smile so wide it almost hurt to look at. "No," she whispered. "It's the best news." He took a cautious step forward. "What does it mean?" She knelt in front of him, steadying her voice. "It means they've approved it. You're staying with me for good." The words hung in the air, fragile and unreal. Lucas blinked once, then again. "For always?" he asked, barely breathing. Evelyn nodded. "For always, if you'll have me." For a second, he didn't move. Then he collapsed into her arms, crying harder than he ever had before. Not from fear this time, but from relief, from finally being chosen. "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't mess it up." Evelyn held him tightly. "You never did. You were never the problem." That night, the house felt different, fuller, safer. Evelyn cooked dinner while Lucas set the table, humming softly to himself. Later, they sat together by the tree, though Christmas had already passed. "Can we keep it up a little longer? Just because?" Evelyn smiled. "We can keep it up as long as you want." Before bed, Lucas handed her one last drawing. It showed the same house, the same glowing windows, but this time a word was written carefully at the bottom. Home. Evelyn framed it the next morning and hung it by the front door. Weeks later, on a bright winter afternoon, Lucas stood outside in the snow, laughing as Evelyn tried and failed to teach him how to make a proper snowman. His laughter echoed down Maple Street, bold and unafraid. A neighbor passing by smiled and said, "Looks like you've got yourself a family." Evelyn glanced at Lucas, who was brushing snow off his gloves, eyes bright, shoulders relaxed. "Yes," she said, softly. "I do." That night, as Lucas drifted off to sleep, he whispered one last question. "Do you think this miracle will ever disappear?" Evelyn brushed his hair gently from his forehead. "No," she said, "because this one wasn't magic. It was love." Outside, snow continued to fall, not heavy, not loud, but steady, the kind that covers old footprints and makes everything new again. And in that small house on Maple Street, two broken lives had quietly found each other and built something unbreakable. Not a perfect ending, a real one.